But I think the tragedy of Pakistan has been its focus on geopolitics, of strategies of military, influence in Afghanistan, trying to pursue, a cross-border insurgency in India. All these factors were so central to them that they neglected economic development.
As I'm meeting after a long time, and I apologize to the viewers for my voice, I have a bit of a sore throat. And we restarting our conversations based on Raja Mantla, your column, on an interesting note, which is you start off this week's column with a look at Pakistan and India, because both countries are entering their 75th year as independent nation states, post the Raj, as well as partition. So I think it was interesting the way you mentioned partition, because that trauma very much is a part of how we see each other and even how our diplomacy and bilateral relations are conducted. So one of the things you point out is right now Pakistan is in one of its most major crises. It's back to the IMF for a loan. Imran Khan seems to have broken that kind of fear of the army or the army being supreme. He's openly challenging the army. The other two major political parties seem to be together, but one never knows whether an election will actually resolve that crisis. The US is no longer their all-weather friend in some ways for many years, is no longer looking at Pakistan as favorably. How do you see, do you think that this, one of the things you mentioned is that there is a quest for strategic parity with India that has left Pakistan behind in terms of these other economic indicators, social indicators, religion and politics, all with a view to be India's equal in strategic, geopolitical and military terms. Do you think that that sort of single-mindedness is going away? Because even now we see Imran Khan holding up Kashmir or closeness to India as a kind of, it's a political no-go area even for the army. As you point out, Bajwa said, how do you see that resolving, or can it be resolved without a major overall?
Yeah. Firstly, I think what you mentioned about partition is true. I think we're all celebrating our 75th anniversary of freedom, but the partition and its bitter legacies continue to be with us. Many of the political problems in the subcontinent are really about the legacies of the partition, whether it is the Kashmir dispute, the role of minorities, river water sharing, everything is linked to that. And I think this is really a good moment to reflect on that and to see how 75 years later, can we find a different path for India and Pakistan and the Bangladeshis as well, to think of the region differently. I mean, 75 years is long enough for us to look ahead, put behind the past, and rebuild a different future for ourselves. I think the problem here has been that, look, India now has a strong leader, that it has strong majority in the parliament. This is his second term. So in a sense, Modi has a lot of freedom of action in engaging in diplomacy and with the neighbors. You remember there was a time when even Vajpayee or Manmohan Singh struggled to find a policy with Pakistan because there was no domestic support for their policies. But today there is. But paradoxically, Pakistan always, the army seemed to be such a strong actor that they were always there to shape the destiny of Pakistan. I think that is a big change today. The army does not seem to know what to do with Imran Khan, with the economic reform, with the great power relations, and with India. So I think this is a peculiar situation in Pakistan where the old order is breaking down, and there is no new consensus. So that is a break. But in looking at the question of parity that you mentioned, one of the sources of partition, and from then Pakistan's claim to be equal to India, has been a central theme, whether Muslim League's arguments with the Indian National Congress, or since then, Pakistan's effort to be seen as equal of India. But I think the tragedy of Pakistan has been its focus on geopolitics, of strategies of military, influence in Afghanistan, trying to pursue, a cross-border insurgency in India. All these factors were so central to them that they neglected economic development. While India, for all its problems, I mean, whether it's whichever party ruled India, the core purpose of the Indian state was still development. So India, you can say, was a developmental state. There were a lot of arguments, the right path, etc. But in Pakistan, the developmental state disappeared fairly quickly. So in a sense, they were living off geopolitics. Their location was important. The bet that somebody will bail them off. The Americans might bail them off. The Chinese might bail them off. The Saudis might bail them off. So in a sense, the Pakistani elite never took responsibility for their own economy. And I think that's where they find themselves in today. An economy that is struggling at $300 billion is 10 times smaller than India's, is $100 billion smaller than Bangladesh. So it's really the decline of Pakistan on the economic front. They might have the nuclear weapons. They might have one of the most powerful armies, but you can't eat those. You can't feed on those. So I think they have a problem. To be fair, I think General Bajwa recognized this problem. He sought a reset in economy, in foreign policy, and moved from geoeconomics to geopolitics. But he's not been able to move forward. And I think Imran Khan was part of the problem. Though Imran was brought to power by Bajwa, he was not willing to support the reset of the Pakistan's national policies. So there is a serious trouble in Pakistan right now.
So you spoke about Imran Khan. One of the things he seems to be doing is making, to a degree that we don't see in India, although we see it now increasingly, to make domestic politics out of diplomacy or international countries' strategic orientation. So is there in case, I mean, is this the kind of thing that say electoral loss for if the current ruling coalition led by Mr. Shahbaz Sharif or whoever, whichever, whether it's the Bhuttos or the Sharifs or someone else who rules, wins an election, do they have more room for maneuver with that kind of political legitimacy and sections of the army backing them vis-a-vis India or even vis-a-vis the US? US, in fact, in some ways is now a greater domestic political issue. That's what Imran Khan keeps raking up as a way of, as a political matter, as saying that these guys have sold out to the West.
So like in India, of course, we always had this foreign hand argument that there was always the Americans were up to something, the CIA was up to something, but it was never a mainstream argument.
Yeah.
I mean, you had the left, you had sometimes the opposition groups using it, but it was never the mainstream argument because there was a broad consensus on Indian foreign policy, and whatever the charges of foreign hand in India, nobody questioned the basic patriotism, a basic nationalism of the ruling establishment. But what's happened in Pakistan is, though Imran Khan was desperate to get good relations with the US, in fact, when he returned from Pakistan, from the United States in 2019, he said, look, how it feels like I've won the World Cup again. From that, now he's using America as an instrument to attack the current government, calls it an imported government. Imran Khan negotiated an agreement with the IMF, but walked away halfway through. Now he's accusing the next government, look, these guys are slaves of the IMF. So I think it's purely instrumental. Imran Khan, who lived in the West, is married to a British woman who's studied at Oxford. It's so brutally cynical, but it is having resonance because there is deep reservoir of anti-Americanism in Pakistan, anti-Westernism in Pakistan. Decades of Islamic politics, I think, have generated that. So he's tapping into that to finish the government. So I think while Bajwa wants to reset relationship with the US, with India, get more balance into their foreign policy, but Imran has grown too big he's not a patsy of the armed forces, and that is the problem. And I've also argued that the army itself seems to be divided. And a lot of the retired army officers are openly championing Imran Khan. They criticize the decision to remove him from power. And the narrative, Imran Khan's narrative, politicians are corrupt. I'm an outsider. I'm an honest guy. And so this whole old politician bunch is corrupt, crooks. They must be thrown out. That has again got a lot of resonance in the Pakistani society, particularly the emerging lower middle class, which has risen, which no longer has respect for the old feudal landlords, feudal elites that run Pakistan. So I think there is a structural crisis between the old elites who can't respond to the aspirations of the new emerging classes, while Imran Khan cynically trying to use them. But he has no answers to Pakistan's problems, whether it is changing the economy, whether it is reforming it, whether it is putting a new foreign policy framework for Pakistan. So he's exploiting it. And so he's going to make it harder for Pakistan to actually get out of the difficult situation that it finds itself in.
Right, so everyone should read the piece. It will be on the indianexpress.com, and probably wherever you're watching this video should be in the description. So one last question. You end on a very interesting note, almost positive note, that India right now, as you pointed out already, we are the bigger country. We are, but also the bigger economy. We have a degree of stability that few of our neighbors right now have. You can see a sort of, and with vis-a-vis Pakistan, particularly, Mr. Modi had made symbolic gestures of inviting Mr. Nawaz Sharif for his inaugural, for his swearing in, then subsequently going in that surprise visit for his birthday. But then you've seen a sort of lull. And even perhaps because of the nature of our domestic politics, the sort of villainy created Pakistan as almost a code word in politics for other things that it's used in. This kind of statesman-like statement that you hope for, do you think that India has the kind of, our diplomacy right now is, and our politics is capable of that kind of maturity and long-term vision, which is to say that, listen, in this age, if Mr. Modi gets on the ramparts of the Red Fort and says, the time has come for us to grow together and bury the hatchet, or it's not going to be a policy announcement, it will be a broad signaling. Do you think that we're capable, that kind of thing is a possibility, because there's also domestic constituencies which may jump on even the tallest leader for that?
No, I would say three things. I think one, the occasion demands it. So this is really, Modi has put so much into the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, making it a point. Normally Indians, we don't care for anniversaries, come and go. But for Modi, he's made this a national endeavor to really make the celebration of 75th anniversary into something big. Obviously, because he's in charge, for him, this is a big thing. And we all know, annually, speaking from the Red Fort is the major event of Independence Day. And it's always been occasion to outline policies, sum up initiatives. And in some sense, we've also seen in the past reaching out to the neighbors. So the Red Fort speech on August 15th this year is a special moment. Yeah. So I think it gives an opportunity for Prime Minister Modi to consider. This is really a recommendation, a suggestion that he should take this opportunity. Second, I think what we've seen in India in the last few years, it's really the conservative right-wing party leaders have greater room for maneuver with Pakistan. Yeah. It's all often said about it was Nixon, the Republican, who could go to China. Yeah. And that this idea that it is those on the right who can actually make peace with enemies. The general theory in politics. So after all, Vajpayee went to Pakistan twice to consider, the Lahore Accord, and later in the Islamabad in 2004. Then he said, look, I want to negotiate on Kashmir, Insaniyat, on the base of Insaniyat, on the base of friendship with Pakistan. So in a way that you saw Vajpayee do things which Narasimha Rao could not do. Yeah. And then for 10 years of Manmohan Singh, despite all the goodwill he had for Pakistan and the secret negotiations on Kashmir that Manmohan Singh did with General Musharraf, he could not get the Congress party to support his visit to Pakistan. Yeah. Forget signing a deal. That in 10 years, he didn't make one trip to Pakistan. We know that Manmohan Singh's house, village is in Pakistan. There was a chance that he could visit the village. We could have been a celebration of sorts, and that there were a lot of negotiations at the time. Diplomats at the time, like Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, Ambassador Sham Saran, have said, look, there were deals ready to be made on Siachen, on Sir Creek. And then Ambassador Sati Lamba, who recently passed away, told us about, there was a secret negotiation on Kashmir. But there was no political will on part of the Congress party. Even if Manmohan Singh wanted to go, Sonia Gandhi, the leadership, was not ready to accept that. So in a sense, they were tied by their own fears. while Vajpayee had the freedom, and Modi has even greater freedom because his hegemony over the party and the parliament is supreme, and that any questioning of that, he has a lot more room to deal with it than the others. And to his credit as well, for example, he invited Nawaz Sharif on the very first day of his work. Then in 2015, on a 1 hour notice, he flies into Lahore, walks past a police guard, and helter-skelter breaks out in Pakistan. So in a sense, he has the boldness to take those kind of initiatives. So therefore, I think he has a chance better than any other leader before. And his, shall we say, his shield against any criticism is much stronger because he's also done something which none of the other leaders could do, which is change the terms of engagement with Pakistan. That is, on terrorism, you respond hard way, you change the constitutional status of Kashmir. So in a sense, you're not negotiating from weakness. Yeah. So I think he has an opportunity then to say, look, let's, it's a good moment to think about ourselves. Let's work together. Let's put differences aside. Let's put controversies aside. Let's help each other. Because for Pakistan and for India, having a reasonable, I'm not talking about friendship, it's too strong a word, a normal, non-hostile relationship, bits of trade, exchange of ambassadors, all these can dramatically help both the countries to improve their position in the international system. And Pakistan needs it a lot more. And that is where the problem is, in that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see Pakistan. Pakistan needs a reset, a national reset. And in India, reset must be part of it. Yeah. But we are the last ones to tell them, to tell them, look, what to do with India. But I think there is a debate in Pakistan. So for us, whether the elite is ready to accept or not, it's a good moment to make a gesture. I'm not talking about concessions, a gesture to engage and unconditionally to start working on trade and other economic cooperation and leave it to them. I mean, they have to respond because the ball is in their court. And having invested so much of energy, emotional intensity, ideological energy, they have a problem. But I think showing some goodwill at this point, appealing to the people that 75 years after partition, and we need now to find a way to live together. And that's why I think Bilawal Zardari's statement of Pakistan Foreign Minister, Aaj nahi to kal. At some point, you have to live together. And as in fact, Zardari, Bilawal took a statement from Vajpayee, who said, look, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your neighbors. Yeah. Yeah. So I think if Pakistan moves towards realism, I mean, I'm not betting on it, but I think we must be open to engaging a Pakistan that is willing to deal with us.
Absolutely. So everyone, please read the piece. It is on theindianexpress.com, where you should probably subscribe to theindianexpress.com as well. And thank you so much, sir. We will see you next week. Thank you so much.
See you then. Thank you. Thank you, Akash.